of and the destruction of the state of Israel, the 10 tribes.
Yeah.
And that happened 200-300 years before that.
About 100 years, actually, but about 100 years, a little bit less than 100 years. But my point, yes, that's true. He could have spoken then, but what he's prophesying here is so that. But the point was there was a approximately 300-year break, 300-year division between the Jewish people being divided into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom.
Right.
And they developed very differently. They developed into very different nations, and the exile of the 10 tribes was extremely thorough, though elements of them ultimately returned. But so there's this idea, God tells Yechezkel, as Bachrit Hayamin, in the end of days, Judah and the Israelites, Judah and Joseph will join. So who wants to hazard a guess? What's the connection of this Haftarah to today's Torah reading, to this week's Torah reading? Anyone want to take a guess?
Yeah, Vayigash.
Right, that Judah approaches Joseph. They were separate. Judah was the ringleader in the sale of Joseph, and now they're united. So Ezekiel is saying that just as they were separated and united, so too in the future. And by the way, you have to understand that the Haftarot speak about reality, but they also speak conceptually and allegorically. And even though elements of the 10 tribes, Jeremiah found them and brought them back to being part of the body politic of the Jewish people, there's the sense that there are the 10 lost tribes. In other words, that elements of the Aseret HaShvatim, of these 10 tribes who were exiled 100 years before and didn't see, when it came to Judea, all those Jews were exiled to the Babylonian Empire that later became the Persian Empire, and they were together, and they had a network, and they had a system, and they had courts, and they had a common liturgy that was developed at that time, and so on. But the tribes, there was a sense that the 10 tribes were scattered to the winds, or at least elements of them. And conceptually, whether you're from the southern or northern kingdom way back when, conceptually, this is the idea of the tribe of Joseph are all the lost Jews. In other words, all the Jews who are disconnected, who might not even know they're Jewish. So there's a sense that that the time will come where all of these will be gathered together as one again. And that's connected to the earlier part of this chapter, which talked about the dry bones, the revival of those dead skeletons in the desert, which is at the very least a metaphor for the consistent, impossible revivals of the Jewish people. Just when it looked like we disappear, we don't. So,
but we have the tools today to maybe find the remnants of these tribes through the DNA analysis.
Yeah, though it's very interesting that some of the better candidates don't have any DNA connection. But in other words, there's been some good candidates. And of course, it's entirely possible, that people can be part of the Jewish people, even though their DNA is extremely diluted. Have any of you ever done a DNA test? You know, they have all these DNA tests. Anyone ever done something like 23andMe or something like that? So you'll discover that a third cousin is like 2% common DNA. Very, very low. And my point is that if you have someone, someone Jewish, but there's been, a lot of converts, or they're halachically Jewish, but there's, been a lot of other people mixing into the family, the DNA might not tell you anything, but as far as the Torah is concerned, as far as the Creator is concerned, these people belong to the Jewish people. One could be even not Jewish according to Hitler, Yamach Shemo. One could be 164th and 128th Jewish in terms of ancestry, and be as halachically Jewish as Moses himself, as long as you have the female line. I told a story in the past in this class about someone whom a conversion candidate that one of my sisters was studying with, and it turned out she wasn't a conversion candidate because she had a single Portuguese, Jewish, Spanish American, Sephardic great grandmother way back in the era of the American Revolution, who mothered a female line that ended with this person in the 1980s. So, at any rate, my point being that whether we have scientific means of finding them or not, the destiny as directed by the Almighty will find them. The Atav and Adam. So now, very often prophets are told to engage in a physical action to express the conceptual and spiritual message that God is giving. And I want to dwell on this because this is really important, because the ultimate purpose of Judaism is the actual manifestation in the physical world by human beings' physical capacities of godliness. In other words, there are many deep mystical ideas to tzedakah, but the ultimate purpose of creation is that you take $1 out of your pocket and give it to the poor person. There are many beautiful ideas about prayer, but prayer is not activated until a person actually says the words. And so on. We can wax poetic about the concept of redemption and freedom, but one doesn't truly fulfill the mitzvah of re-experiencing the Exodus from Egypt till you actually put a piece of matzah in your mouth. And the idea is that if God is relegated to the spiritual, then God is not everywhere and God is not everything. As the Kabbalists call it, the Ein Sof, the ultimate essence of everything is God, and that ultimate essence must be present everywhere, even in the physical. And the goal of Judaism is to reveal the inherent godliness and unity of everything. So when God speaks to a prophet about something that God sees happening maybe thousands of years in the future, nevertheless, there needs to be some physical action to connect the spiritual vision of the prophet with the real world that we live in. And this is a very powerful thing, because basically everything in Judaism it can begin from the loftiest concept, but it needs to express itself in the physical in a way that we can tangibly see the difference and tangibly experience that what we're asked to think of and to live with actually comes into this world. And therefore, God tells Yechezkel, bring it down to the physical. Ata ben Adam, you mortal person, kach lecha eitz echad. Take, by the way, why is Yechezkel called ben Adam? Because Yechezkel, as other prophets, is anticipating the ultimate transformation of existence, the ultimate redemption, however distant it is. And Adam begins the story. And Ben Adam, you're the child of Adam, you have to move it forward to the end. So take a piece of wood. Right on one piece of wood, this is for Judah and all the Israelites associated with him, the southern kingdom. Take another piece of wood and write on it, Yosef, this is to Yosef Eitz Ephraim, the stick of Ephraim, because most of the kings of the northern kingdom were from Ephraim, Joseph's younger son. V'chol beis Yisrael chaveirav, and all the house of Israel associated with him. Now, you'll notice that the chaveirav is in brackets because it's pronounced chaveirav, but it's written in the Tanakh, the way the tradition, the Masorah, has the scroll written, is that it's written without a yud, so it looks like chaveiro, his fellow. And the idea is that the unity of the disparate parts of the Jewish people will happen when they see themselves as one. Chaveiro is in the singular, chaveirav is in the plural. When we see ourselves as one, when we see that which binds us is greater than that which separates us, that's when we move towards the vision of this haftarah. And he says, bring them together on Vayula Achadim Biyadecha. Let them be joined by your hand. In other words, take these two sticks and bring them together and hold them together in your hand. And walk around. God tells him, walk around holding these two sticks together in your hand. Now, since Ezekiel was a significant figure, and when your fellow people, when the children of your people, your fellow Jews will ask you, Lamor saying, Halo Tagid Lanu, will you not tell us, Meilalach? What are you doing walking around with two sticks in your hand? Put them down, take a rest. Daber Elam, answer them and say, Ko Amar Hashem Elokim, so says the ruler, the infinite one, Hine ani lokeach es eitz Yosef. I am going to take the wood. As you know, in Hebrew, wood and tree is the same word, etz, right?
Yes.
So the idea is that I'm going to take the tree of Joseph, that whole line, that whole life, that whole tree and its branches, Asher b'yad Ephraim, that was ruled by Ephraim. V'shivtei Yisrael chaveirav, and all the tribes of Israel who were close part of Joseph's kingdom of the north. V'nasati otam alav etz eitz Yehuda, and I will place upon them the stick, the tree of Yehuda. V'asitam lech eitz echad v'yachad miyadi. God says, I'll make them one. There'll be one in my hand. In other words, God's hand, as we know, is metaphorical for God's action. So he says, the time will come, I'm going to unite them, and this very long separation will end. And you should show them these pieces of wood with the writing on them. So, of course, the question now is, right now you have all these tribes and all these Jews scattered all over the world. How are you going to make two groups as one when each of these two groups is fragmented and scattered all over the place? And I should say that there's another verse where the Jewish people are called Sepazura, the scattered sheep. It means to say that we ourselves are scattered. We have very different ways of looking at things. We're in all kinds of different places, spiritually and emotionally. The Jewish people are very, very scattered. So how do you expect to bring together these two groups when each of these groups is tremendously fragmented? So here God responds. The Daber Elam, speak to them. Speak to the people, and these are the people who just have been driven out with nothing into the desert, to the long drive to Babylon. The temple's been destroyed. The Jewish people first was the northern tribes were exiled, so they're at the lowest of low. That they're nadir. So speak to them and say, Ko Amar Hashem Elokim. So says God. In Lokeach es b'nei Yisrael mibein hagoyim. Just as you took these two sticks and put them together, I will take the children of Israel from among all the nations that they went there. I will gather them from all around the globe. I will bring them back to the land. I will make them, the final status will be, there'll be one nation in the land. Baharei Yisrael, on the mountains of Israel. So here we should ask an important question. We talk often about bringing us back to the land of Israel and so on. What is the significance of on the hills of Israel? I'll make them one nation, Baharei Yisrael, on the hills of Israel. What's the significance of that? Does anyone want to take a stab at it?
Not sure.
Baharei Yisrael.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
In other words, we often talk about coming back to the land of Israel, to Yerushalayim. What is this Harei Yisrael, the mountains of Israel? And there are many. There's a Dead Sea. There's a coastal plain. There are many features.
Well,
Why specifically is God telling Yechezkel, I'll bring them back to the mountains of Israel?
that's where.
Well, it wasn't the mountains
That's where
where they became a
Yerushalayim is.
people.
1 second. What's it? 1 minute, Joe. What, Sylvia?
Well, it was at a mountain base that they became the people. That God gave them the word.
So Sylvia hit on something very, very beautiful, very important. When they first came into the land of Israel, if you remember, primarily what they conquered was the Jordan Valley and the hills. The coastal plain they hadn't conquered yet. When at the end of Joshua, it took much later, till David's time, to conquer the whole coastal plain. The Jewish people began Baharim in the mountains. So, and when they began, they were united. When they began, they were united. They didn't have a king. They didn't even have a king. So, yes, Sylvia. So part of it is that God is saying, I'm going to bring you back to the beginning. When you began in the high country, in the hills, in the mountains, and you were united, and you were hopeful, and you were fresh, and because they had just come out of Egypt, just come in the land with Joshua. So I want to bring you back to that point of hope and enthusiasm and freshness when you come back together. Everything began in the hills, so I'm bringing you back to the beginning. I'm bringing you full circle. Very nice, Sylvia. Any other thoughts?
That's where Yerushalayim is. That's where the temple.
Yeah, but it doesn't say Yerushalayim. It often says Yerushalayim, right? It often says Yerushalayim in the text. So
Hare Yehuda.
Yeah, but here it says Hare Yisrael, which is more generic, right? Just an interesting choice of words. That's all. So Sylvia, that's I think a very nice approach. Okay.
Thank you.
Because it's true, that's where they got their start. Also, you should know that one of the features, Israel was very productive agriculturally. As a matter of fact, until the Jews came back this time, in ancient times, it was more productive than it ever was afterwards. And one of the reasons is because the most intensive agriculture was on the hills. They made terraces that held the water in, special layers of gravel and so on, very, very sophisticated, actually. And those terraces made Israel incredibly fertile, incredibly productive. And so the hills are where the primary focus, as if it were, of the Jewish people. There is also a concept. Where did you go? So the other is, so the Targum, the Aramaic translation, one of the oldest translations, oldest commentaries, says the holy mountain of Israel, which means to say that Israel conceptually, spiritually stands above all the places you're coming from.
That's right.
I'm sorry,
Rabbi,
what?
I thought, excuse me?
You go ahead.
Can I get in again? I don't know what
please.
goes on. I'm sorry?
Go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I also have a picture of water coming from the mountaintops. And for some reason, water being related to the source of life.
Yeah, right, because the water falls on the mountains. Israel lives from the stored water, from the cisterns. Yeah.
And returning them to where they will get the source.
Right. Yeah, very good. So, Omelech Echad Yelechu, and one king, they shall have one king, and they won't be two nations, and they won't be divided into two kingdoms anymore. And they will not, and it's interesting, the division causes both groups to worship idols. They won't defile themselves, Bigluleim, with their idols, Shikitsayim, and their despicable behaviors, such as sacrificing their children, Uvachol Pesheim, and all the sins. V'yoshati esem, I will save them in all the places they sinned, right? So it says, Yirmiyahu complains, Jeremiah complains that the Jews worshipped idols under every tree, on every hill. So Hashem says, I'll bring them back to those places, and I'll save them from all the places that they sinned in. And it's a very interesting construction. In other words, I'll save them really within all these places. And in a sense, this is the idea that the recognition of one's failings is the greatest contribution to an improvement. When we recognize our failings, so that drives us to a sense of the good. So really, all these places where they worshiped idols, once they acknowledge that emptiness and foolishness, this very worship of idols, once you acknowledge its emptiness, is what drives you to be close to God. And generally speaking, it's not just that, it's a learning experience, but whenever we face something negative and we understand the implications and the emptiness that negativity creates, so this yearns us to fill ourselves with meaning and with purpose and with goodness, and therefore the very emptiness and darkness now becomes light and goodness.
But we
have to be, what Yechezkel is saying is a very important thing, that we don't just put the past behind us. We say, well, what did the past empty me of? So what am I looking for? And I took a trip in the desert, didn't bring enough water, and God forbid I almost died of thirst. So I profoundly appreciate water and how important it is in a way the person who never died of thirst couldn't. It's like my grandparents, who were survivors, would never throw away a piece of bread because they appreciated a piece of bread. So too, when you stare into the abyss and you turn away from it, that presence of the darkness is itself what drives you to the good. And that's what it means. I will save you from all the places where you served. You can take negativity and make it positive by asking yourself what light was missing that caused this darkness. Then you appreciate the light much more, and the very darkness, the very evil, the very abyss now becomes something positive, moving you in the right direction. In the Torah, there's a very beautiful and simple parable for this. That with an arrow, if you want to shoot an arrow high, the more you pull it to the ground, the more the arrow descends to the ground, the further it flies once you let go of it. And you will be for me a nation, and I will be for you Elokim. Now, the word Elokim, for God, Elokim actually means power. And whenever we use the term Elokim, and it can be used for other gods, but Elokim means power. So in other words, it's what we experience. There is the four-letter name of God, Yud Kei Vav Kei. That's, God is transcendent, and so on. Elokim means God is the life force that you feel within you. So I won't be a distant God. I'm going to be present in your life. You'll feel me in the everyday.
Elohim is used in the first sentence of the Torah, is it not?
Yes, it is. Elokim, in other words, Elokim means that which I experience of the Creator. Havaya is God as he is to himself. So the goal is that this infinite being be present in the fabric of my everyday life. So when God says, I, Havaya, I, the infinite source of all, will be Elokim, it means that you will feel me in the everyday. You will feel the divinity in every breath and in every blade of grass you see.
The language that Yechezkel is using sounds like he is really talking about Achrit HaYamim.
He is talking about the end of days. I said this before, of course. He is talking about the end of days.
It's not going to happen in even our lifetime.
Well, I would hope not. I would hope it will happen in our lifetime. When the
Mashiach comes.
Right, so we've waited long enough. Vavdi David.
Sure.
And he goes on to say that my servant David, Melech Aleim, will be a king over them, and one shepherd for all of them. That will go with my justice, for my statutes they will follow, and they'll do them. Now, so the question is, how can David be the king when it's the descendant of David who'll be a king. It says in many places in Isaiah. But the idea is that there is a quality of David. What's the quality of David? Avdi, my servant. That David's quality is that he wasn't about himself. He was about the mission. He was about the responsibility he was given. And more than that, the word Eved, by the way, means to work. David worked on himself. David had some terrible lapses. But you see from the Tehillim how profoundly he repented, how strongly he sought to change himself. He says, my heart is empty within me. He had to completely empty himself out and transform himself. So my servant David also means that David, in other words, who will rule the Jewish people? What will be the nature of this ultimate kingdom? A place where people work on themselves and have transformed themselves. Through all the troubles of the exile, we will have refined and transformed ourselves. And there'll be one shepherd.
Why do we call it kingdom? Because that means there will be a king.
There will be a king, yes.
Why?
Why? Because
and the end
because
of days,
if you have a king,
expect any kings.
Well, so the answer is if you have a king who's perfect in his behavior, if you have a king who has vision. Remember, Yeshayahu says that that final king, that redeemer, will not rule with power, with a stick. He'll rule by vision, by teaching. In other words, if you have someone who has the vision to teach and bring out the best in everyone, that's the best thing. Because we won't need a king to wave a sword around. We need someone to help us find the best in ourselves. That's the spirit that Yeshayahu talks about. And you'll live on that land, and you and your children, and your children's children forever. And my servant David, this quality of David, will be a prince over them for Olam, forever.
So, Rabbi, if David is the prince, we think of God himself as Elohim, as the king.
Yeah. No, David is just.
As the king.
The king is especially in the Messianic era, is just God's representative.
Exactly.
In other words, the whole and Abarvanel talks about this, that the king that God wants is not the king that we had at all throughout our history. The king that God wants is someone who doesn't need to rule because he inspires. And I'll make for you a covenant of peace, an everlasting covenant, and I'll make you many, and I will place my sanctuary among you forever. Now that is the and my presence shall rest over them, and I'll be for you a God, and you'll be for me a nation. And the last thing is, and then V'yodu Agoyim, all the nations will know, because I sanctify Israel when my sanctuary is within them forever. Now, this is important because ultimately the goal is not, as Maimonides writes, at the Achritim in the end of days, that the Jews rule over everyone, that they conquer everyone. The Yadu means to know. In other words, the ultimate development of humanity is where knowledge fills the earth, where people will look to the temple and see the knowledge that comes out of there. And knowledge is a very important word, and I want to spend some time in it because it appears very often in the Tanakh, in the Bible. It appears very often throughout the Torah and Nevi'im Uktuvim. And it's not knowledge the way the encyclopedia or Wikipedia or whatever contains knowledge. That means realization. So you know that in slightly older English, a person will say, oh, I want to realize my ambitions, right? In slightly older English, that's what we say. I'm going to realize my ambitions, right? So that means to make something real. So when you say the nations will know and the Jewish people will know and so on, what this means really is this idea that all these good ideas, all these nice ideas will become the reality. They won't become utopian ideals of peace and harmony, all the things the prophets talk about. V'yadu, they become real. Okay, that's the key idea. So this is the Haftarah, and now we have our time for questions, comments, alternate interpretations, and so on. Go ahead. Go at it, people. Anyone?
The only comment I would like to...
Yeah.
Oh,
Go ahead, Natalie.
I would like to mention that part about the hills, because I think it was very important, because the hills, as I can see, symbolizes the most important experience they had. Yeah, the most important, the most meaningful experience was up on the hills, and also symbolizes when we want to elevate ourselves, yeah, to try to reach God and light up and reach for enlightenment.
So the uplifting,
higher, yeah, spiritual.
The uplifting of Israel, very nice idea.
Yeah, uplifting, but it was spiritual, and it changed them completely. So when they came down the hills, they were completely different. So and also in our history, all over in many nations and other religions and cultures and civilizations as well, they also have this concept or idea that when you go up a hill and you have contact with something higher, and it symbolizes transformation. Yeah,
lifting yourself, very nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So
and also we can relate that with the other verse here, number 27, about my presence. And so when we think about God's presence up on the hill, on the Mount Sinai, so we can remember that, yeah, and relate all the experience everybody had that there, right? Which was very meaningful.
Very nice. Now, I have to say about the hills, there's a simpler explanation. The Metzudas David suggests that that's where they come together, because basically, if you look at a topographical map of Israel, Yehuda and Shomron are both along this line of hills that stretch, from the south, all the way into the Galil. So the division was in the hills. That's where the division happened. That's where they separated, in the hill country. That's where Rechavam, and Yeravam parted company, the first king of the 10 tribes. And so the division happened in the hills. So the restoration and reunification of the Jewish people will also happen in the hills. Now, I have to say that also this idea of Yehuda and Yosef coming together, we talked about it briefly that earlier, that Yosef is this idea of learning and knowledge, and Yehuda is the idea of doing and prayer, that which comes from below to above. And the unification of them means that we're able to have both, because knowledge is important, but if it's not expressed in action, as we just said, it doesn't really mean anything. But Yehuda, who's the doer, our prayer and our actions cannot be directed without the knowledge of what the goal is. So the unity of Yehuda and Yosef is that the person who does needs to understand the reasons and the concepts and the ideas and the spiritual benefit of doing what he or she does. But the person who knows needs to be able to do. And just to know and not to do, it says in the Gemara that it's like a person who isn't born, because to be created and not do is like to be formed and not to live on this world. So it's the Yehuda and Yosef, spiritually speaking, from the point of view of the Darash, and in particular the Kabbalah, is very much the unification of that which comes from above, the receiving of divine knowledge, but that which comes from below, where we take our own experiences and form prayer and do the mitzvot out of our own physical material.
Didn't David write a few times, I will lift my eyes up to the hills, my help comes.
Psalm 121. Because a hill, and also a hill is sort of like, you have to climb the hill, right? So I'm at the bottom of the hill. I'm in the valley. I look to the hills. That's where my help comes from.
Right.
It's like the sound of music. She talks about the music, the hills.
I don't know. I never saw that film.
You should.
I heard. Okay. Well, whatever.
Highly recommend it.
Okay, it's a very old film, but
it played last night, actually.
Oh yeah.
I would like to. It's interesting you mentioned just Kabbalah. I was going to ask you, how is it that the Kabbalists took so much liberty to go off that road in so many ways? It's amazing to me.
Well, for that we'll need a discussion, a separate discussion of the Kabbalah, because quite frankly, I don't see that. I see them as bringing together all the strands of Judaism, all the strands of Torah, in a very comprehensible way. The Kabbalists represent the most, in a sense, the most loyal, traditional, and authentic expression of the Torah, in my opinion. But we'll talk about it another time, because time does not allow. But what the important thing the Kabbalists do is reveal the inner spiritual dynamic of Judaism. So Yehuda and Yosef, right? Yosef's the wise one. Yehuda's the one who says, I'm going to bring Binyamin home. Yehuda's the one who confronts Yosef and so on, even in their personalities. Yosef is wisdom. Yosef is the favorite child. Yehuda is the one who admits he's wrong with Tamar, who gets them to send Binyamin, who puts his life on the line for Binyamin. Yosef is the knower and Yehuda is the doer, on a very basic level. And the idea of this haftarah and this parsha is we need both. Because to do without knowledge, without the knowledge, without the awareness, without the enthusiasm, it becomes dry and cracks. But to know wonderful things and not to do, there's no point. What we know needs to drive us to doing, to actually experiencing Judaism, in the context of the physical world. So that's the idea.
So the chain that holds us together is education.
Right, but education in chinuch, which is also the word Chanukah, right? Well, for education, it means both to educate and to dedicate something new. In other words, in Judaism, education isn't just the 3 R's. In Judaism, you learn the Torah, then you dedicate something. You dedicate a temple. You create a temple out of the physical world you live in. And that's everything, because all of the education in Torah is designed to change the way we behave. It's absolutely true.
I would have to guess that in Egypt, since the tribes lived together, basically, that Yosef and Yehuda did not get together so well, that they were separated even in Egypt.
Well, Yosef probably had obligations in the capital, and the Jews lived in Goshen. Goshen was the frontier. It's the last bit of Egypt that's attached to the Sinai.
No,
Goshen is eastern. Goshen is eastern Egypt.
I'm talking about the tribe of Yosef, the Ephraim and
No,
Manasseh.
the tribe of Yosef was probably very associated with Yosef's obligations to Pharaoh. They probably didn't see each other very much.
Well, maybe that's the beginning of it, right
Who
there.
knows?
Yeah.
Right there.
Who knows?
God knows.
But at any rate, the concept is that the harbinger of redemption is unity. Move towards to find unity, acknowledging differences. Yosef is Yosef. Yehuda is. Can find a way. We appreciate each one brings to the table. Okay. I wish everyone a very good night. Thank you all for joining us for this week's Haftarah discussion. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you, Rabbi.
we have
Thank you.
Shacharis tomorrow. Otherwise, I will see you guys for the full complement of classes on Thursday, except there is no Thursday night class. There is Thursday Minyan, there is Thursday Talmud, and there is Thursday, Thursday 15 minutes of Torah, which has been nicely attended, thank God. But there's no night class Thursday.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
And we're probably, I'm going to drop the Zoom Myra from the schedule after this week because there doesn't seem to be much attendance. The Shacharis is doing well, but the Myra we got to work on. Okay, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, and have a good night.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov, everyone.